Well, I guess we can get going. Thank you everyone for showing up on time to our first webinar, Understanding Coronavirus in America, How to Use Our Data, or everything you ever wanted to know about our data. Andrew Becker, who is in the Center for Economic and Social Research as part of Dornsife, will be presenting. He's a research programmer too, and he is also a data analyst, and he's been working with the data since we began collection back in March and on many other projects before that. And he's going to go over sort of the ins and outs of our data, how to work with it, explain some things about the variables and give you some resources so you can analyze it on your own. We can utilize the question and answer function of this webinar, so feel free to write your questions in as you have them, and at the end we'll go over them all. Or you can also raise your hand and we can have you ask the questions. So without further ado, Andrew, do you want to take it over?
Yep, I'm going to share here quick.
Yep.
Go to slide. Okay.
Great.
Great. Okay. Sorry, you're asking me little things about sharing. Okay. So welcome everyone. Here is a short outline of what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to begin with a super quick overview of the Understanding America study, UAS for short, as well as the UAS COVID surveys. And I really do mean quick. This first section here is here more for reference. So I'm going to be flying through it, and then we'll spend the rest of our time discussing the COVID longitudinal files, that is the tracking data, and discussing any questions you folks might have. Let's see here. So beginning with the super quick summary of the UAS and the COVID surveys. This is a one-slide summary of the US for kind of future reference purposes. I'm not going to read through it here. And this is a one-slide overview of the COVID surveys. And again, just reference purposes for now. And on the next few slides, we have a list of the topics asked about the COVID surveys. There's some core modules we ask in every wave, such as any experience respondents have had or their families have had with COVID-19. And the other core COVID course survey topics are listed on this slide, as well as on this next slide. And then there are also many topics asked in a subset of waves or in a single wave alone. Oh, and if anyone has questions, I don't mind, I should have said at the beginning, I don't mind getting, we have plenty of time for questions and stuff. So any questions you can interrupt me at will. And here's a quick rundown of the sample. The big takeaway right now, I think, for these purposes of this webinar is we have a sample that's representative of the US population, and it's also a subsample of this that is representative of the LA County. There are 2 COVID surveys administered each wave. The long form survey is administered to the entire national sample, which includes the LA County subsample, and the short form, which is given to the LA County subsample only. There are 2 main takeaways on this slide here. One is that the national sample, not in LA County, takes the long form every 2 weeks, and the LA County takes both the long form and short form in alternating weeks. And the second takeaway is hidden in this slide. It's a really awesome pandemic pun joke that I'm real proud about, but to get to the pun payoff will require going into more detail than we have time for here, which is, so this is a take-home fun for all those of you who download these webinar slides. I'm very proud of that. And here's even more detail about survey fielding that we don't have time for. Okay, moving on to this webinar's main focus, the longitudinal files. So here's one slide overview of the two longitudinal files we produce. The takeaway for now is there are two files. The national file, which contains national longitudinal file, which contains data from all respondents in the sample, including those respondents from LA County. And then you have the LA County file, which contains only data from the LA County residents. And you can download links to both of those files, as well as all archived longitudinal files and documentation from this spot here, this website here. And here's where you end up when you click on that link. This is the COVID-19 data page. Sorry, the small font here. So when you're on here, you scroll down and you'll end up seeing this. You have a couple links, and the one we're going to do now is click on the national survey data link. So we're going to go to the national longitudinal file here. So you click on that, and here you are at the national survey data page. Scroll down here, and you can find links to download the national longitudinal data sets. So that's right here in blue. Yeah, we have it in Stata, CSV, and SAS formats. Note there's also individual data section here with data sets for each individual survey, but I think for like 95% of people or more, the longitudinal file will be the way to go. It's been cleaned, harmonized, and includes weights over the entire sample. It's just a real lot easier to work with. Plus it comes with documentation. In particular, you got the data description, which is linked here, and the crosswalk, which is linked right above it and right below the data download there. And we'll be looking at the crosswalk here real soon. Going back to that COVID data page, if you're interested in the LA County longitudinal file, that link's right below the national. You just click on that data link and you do everything, basically will be in the exact same spot as it was for the national file. So the rationale for the longitudinal files is we have all these separate surveys, a new set of 2 every wave, and in order to make the survey data easier to use, we've combined all these surveys into longitudinal files. Doing this means we sometimes have to rename some of the variables in the separate surveys. And so we've put together this crosswalk in order to sort out any variable renaming and just be a resource on what's going on across these surveys more generally, such as the waves when different questions were asked, how we're handling any discrepancies, and so forth. So basically, the crosswalk here is like the master key to understanding data in the longitudinal files. It gives a complete overview of everything we ask by wave. So if you want to understand the structure of the data, this is generally the place where you're going to want to start. So looking at what's on the screen here, I know the self values are too small to see, but just kind of want to show the big picture, the broad view of what's contained in the crosswalk. So the first column here, column A, we have the variable name as it'll appear in the longitudinal file. So that's the variables you'll see. In the second, it's kind of second column here, you'll have the variable label. You can't see it all just for size reasons. I shortened that column. And in the final column, we have any variable notes that might have been added. And then in between, we have a column for every single component survey. So that is a column for every wave that's been administered so far. And the values in these columns will mark or do mark whether or not that column's particular survey contains the variable and what this variable was named in that survey. So I guess, I mean, you can't see it, but on the first row here, the real name of the name of the variable in the longitudinal file is working, and in 235, you go to column D, you go down to that same row and you have working, it didn't change. So here's basically a summary of what I just said in written out in text in a slide. And moving on. So, and as I just mentioned, so one piece of information contained in the crosswalk is when variables from specific surveys were renamed and what these new names are. So there are 3 reasons why surveys variable might get renamed. I'll give examples of each of these in the next few slides. So the first reason why a variable is renamed would be you have equivalent questions. So the exact same text, exact same response options have different original variable names in 2 or more surveys. So in the example here, we have a set of, if you look in column A, these are the variable names that will show up in the file. And you have a set of variables, all of which are asking whether respondents have effectively avoided various situations where one is at high risk for contracting COVID. And they all have this prefix EFF underscore. Now you can see in column C here, this is for the variables that were as they were in the raw survey for UAS 230, and they all the coordinate associate are the same. These variables, the variable names in UAS 230 for this question all had CR011 as the prefix for this entire group. But then in UAS 235, they were renamed to have CR019. So in order to kind of help untangle all that, we just renamed it all to have this EFF underscore prefix. And most of the variable renames of this type will be between 230 and then 235 forward, because there was a redesign that happened between the first wave, 230, and then the second wave, 234. So the example here is one instance of that. Okay, and so here is the second reason why we commonly will rename a variable, and that's different question text and or response options have the same original variable name in 2 or more surveys. So it's kind of the opposite of the other one. Here we're kind of splitting a question because there was too many changes. So in UAS example on the screen here is going to be in UAS 235. So if you look in column D here, you have CR031, and there's kind of the flat bottom 4 rows. You got CR031, and when this question was administered in 235, it had 6 response options. But then in the next wave, in UAS 240, this question, CR031, 2 of these response options were removed. And so it still had same name, CR031, but now it's kind of a different question, too different to really stick under the same heading. So in order to represent this difference, the variables were renamed so that they can no longer share, this name, and you can't get them confused. And that's seen over here. The original one in 235 has this suffix. So I guess the one going forward, the one most of the surveys will have, will be called core underscore PERCP. But the kind of first instance here, when we're still, I guess, hadn't quite finalized the question or the first go at it, we mark that by sticking UAS 235 the suffix. So yeah, so this cause of renaming is basically where a variable name, means different, same variable name means different things in different surveys. And when this happens, since you kind of want to know why a lot of times, it'll be also marked in a variable note explaining why the renaming occurred in more detail. So those variable notes will be in the crosswalk, and then Stata also allows you to have variable notes. So they'll be, when you have the Stata format of the data set, they'll be represented there as well. And the third reason why we might rename a variable is to rename the raw survey variables, is to group closely associated questions together. So this is when So an example here, just show it with an example, is you have these variables here you can see in column A. They all got this core care prefix. Now, so we have these questions. Basically, these are all renaming CR004, CR009, CR010A, and CR010B. Those are the names of the variables that you'll find in the raw data set. CR04 asks whether a respondent was tested, diagnosed, or so that would be like 925 here, row 925, core care. That asks whether a respondent was tested, diagnosed, or received medical care for coronavirus. And if yes, then CR09, CR010A, and CR0B will ask more specific questions about this same topic, about testing, diagnosis, and medical care. And they're all in a sequence right after another. So to represent this close association between these four questions, we just renamed them all to begin with the prefix core care, which core care. Yeah, so that's the last kind of renaming thing that we got. So as I mentioned, for reason number 2 before, we also have variable notes, and the crosswalk and Stata have these. We typically add a variable note for one of 2 reasons. One is the one I just mentioned, when a significant change in question text or in response options necessitated a variable rename. And the second reason is when question texts or response options differ only slightly. So, we just deemed it not a big enough difference that you need to kind of make a completely new variable, and so the original variable name is getting preserved. An example of this would be a variable that asks respondents. One example of this, we have a variable in longitudinal files that asks respondents how frequently they were paid. It's LR010. And in the first 3 surveys in which it was administered UAS 235 or fielded, when it was fielded UAS 235, UAS 240, UAS 242, it had 5 response options: monthly, every week, every 2 weeks, every week, and every day. But then in 244 forward, a 6th response option was added twice a month, and that detail is written up into the note. So the variables in the file can be divided into 4 groups. I'm not going to go into this in much detail, but you have survey info variables telling you the wave, the survey source, which is the UAS number, and the survey type. You have my household variables, which are marked in the dataset labels. You'll see those in the variable labels all have my household, MIHH, at the beginning of the label. You have kind of the main core, the UAS COVID survey questionnaire variables, then you have a few derived variables, including the weights. And so in the UAS, there are a number of UAS surveys. As I said at the beginning, well, I didn't say it, but it's in one of those slides. There are over 300 UAS surveys and then as well as a number of special data sets, together containing thousands of additional variables. And these can be easily merged into the COVID longitudinal file. So this is a really powerful thing that you can do with these longitudinal files in order to make a large number of research questions and really enrich what you're looking at, or what you're investigating. And this is implemented with the unique person identifier variable. The name of that is UASID, and it's assigned to each respondent at recruitment into the UAS panel, and it stays fixed across each survey that's taken. So and one particularly rich resource is one of the special data sets, UAS comprehensive file, which contains data and derives variables from a set of core surveys that are repeated every 2 years. It includes data. I'm going to use an example with this. So I'll just give you a quick intro. It includes data on demographics, cognitive tests, personality, financial literacy, subjective well-being, health, retirement, financial management, and the harmonized version of the UAS health and retirement study, among other topics. And that UAS HRS, it's almost the entire, if anyone's familiar with the HRS, we have almost that entire, the questions and derived variables from that in this file. So an example, merging in a variable from the comprehensive file. Here we're going to merge in P13 conscientiousness. That's the name of the variable. This variable, it represents the conscientiousness factor in the Big Five personality traits model. So, you know, all the Big Five personality, a scale with the Big Five personality traits are some of the variables that are in the comprehensive file. I guess just to go over some code, just to show, I guess, how it's pretty easy in Stata. So if you read in your, right here, we're reading in, oh shoot, okay. Read in the COVID data set. That's the first line here. And then you do your merge. Since it'll be a many one because the COVID data set has a row for each combination of wave and respondent, while the comprehensive file it's a long form, so it has a single row for each respondent, while the COVID longitudinal data set is long form, sorry. Okay, this is getting confusing because I messed it up. The comprehensive file is wide and the COVID file is long. And so anyway, basically the take home point is you can use UASID to merge them. And that's what's happening here. We're using UASID to merge them. You don't want to bring in, normally you're probably only going to want to bring in the variables you're interested in instead of bringing in thousands of variables, which is actually in the comprehensive file. So just keeping the UASID kind of variable needed to link, and then the conscientious variable that we're interested in. So you do a left join here. So if merge equals 3, that's when it's in both. And then if merge equals 1, that's when it's only in the COVID longitudinal data set. And then I'm just going to order by conscientiousness here so that we can see it in the output. So here's the state output, and you can see you got these, this goes on, and it'll have every single variable in the longitudinal files. Then it also has the variable from the comprehensive file, this conscientiousness variable. These are some missing value codes. This is more for reference. I don't think we really need to go into this in detail. You got .c, whatever. Parcel completes when a survey is not in the wave and you have not answered, like refusals, don't knows, and then not asked you to skip conditions and such. And another powerful thing, another kind of linking powerful thing that's available with the COVID longitudinal files is you can link it, not only can you link it with internal UAS data, but you can actually also link it with external data. So the state level data sets are already linked. The external state level data is already linked with UASID number. One can merge them with the longitudinal file in the exact same way as I just pretty much discussed. You just use UASID. Some of the data sources, the external data sources that you can link with are the COVID tracking project from the Atlantic, CUSP, which is, if you can read it off here, I guess, Health and Economic Policies from Boston University School of Public Health, New York Times data set, COVID data set, Institute for Mental Health Metrics and Evaluation data set, and Opportunity Insights at Harvard. So it's also, that's all state level you can do right away. It's also possible to link data at a lower level than the state, such as counties, and this requires a custom-made solution though, so just get in touch with UAS with us and we can help with that. So that's all I got. Are there any questions? And yeah, questions. Come forth with your questions.
Thanks, Andrew. No one has written them in the chat yet, but I can start us off with a couple. Where do you find the crosswalk file?
That I'll go back and show you. I actually have that on one of the slides.
Great.
So that is, if I went to the National Survey Data page and then scroll down, And this is where you load your data, and that crosswalk is immediately, it's the bullet immediately below there. UAS COVID-19 survey longitudinal files.
Okay. And also, will you go back to the slide with all the different types of questions? I think it was in the very beginning.
The topics?
Yeah, the topics, because I think, so all of these,
Oops, that's up here.
we can also search in the UAS data pages as well, right? You can search for vaccine, the word vaccine, if you don't know the these different topics. But this overview is certainly useful just to know the expanse of the data we've been collecting in the surveys, since it does go from health to economics, to labor force, to all sorts of different things that are basically being affected by the virus.
Yeah, it's quite a few.
So we have some questions. Lee Duan asked if we could give some recommendations about using the weights.
Recommendations. So I don't know.
Maybe that means, how do we use the weights?
How are they made? So the weights, there's two stages how they're calculated. We have first stage. We have the calculate the base weights. That accounts for differences in the sampling strategies across different sample frames in order to correct for the fact that the sample design used causes probability of being sampled to vary from one zip to another. And then the second stage is post-stratification weights. And those adjust for selective non-response using the census current population survey distributions for a handful, I guess, of key selected variables. Using them, they'll average to 1, sum to the, and so thus you'll end up with the same sample, sum to the UAS survey sample size when you use them. Did that answer your question, or maybe I'm going a little different than what was intended?
Yeah, thank you. Sort of. I think my question is about like, so if you're, I know like when you use weights, usually you want to like to get to obtain a weighted parameter estimates that can represent the US sample or the population.
Right.
But if you research focuses some like a relationship between variables, because I saw some publications using the data, they don't use weights. So that's my question, like, when do you recommend we should use weights, or when like we don't really need to use weights?
That's probably not, there's probably some folks on here maybe answer that a little better than me. I'm an advanced statistician. I think it'll depend on your research, just your research question, obviously, will always be a big part of it. If you want it to be representative of national population, you'll need to use the weights.
Right.
Does anyone else on here maybe?
Yeah, may want to add to it, but I mean, I think that because of the sort of the fast data collection involved with these COVID surveys, a lot of people were just putting out raw data and responses as a way to just sort of capture, that wave's the response if it's really trying to respond to some sort of policy event. But certainly for the published papers that are going through peer review, we would recommend that you actually do apply the weights if you're making any statements about representativity. So it really, like Andrew said, it is up to the researcher, but the weights are included in the file. So they can be used. And if anyone has any questions using and working with the weights, we have a couple of aliases that you can write to for us to help.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, I have one more question. Sorry.
Good.
So I noticed in one of the documents the race breakdown, because it was like has Hispanic and white and African American, and the total is over 100%. So it's like about 110 out of 100. So is that because there overlap, like of some, like maybe some people are self-identified as Hispanic and also um, self-identified as white or African American?
So I guess this was in our data.
Yeah, it's in one of the documentation documents in the website is about the I can't remember exactly the name, but I definitely can find the file and send to you later.
Yeah, so wait, people can choose more than one race, and the
Right.
Hispanic Latino question is separate from the other races. So you will always see that answer, yes or no, Hispanic or Latino, as well as a race question.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But you can send it to us, and we'll try to figure out what we need to add to the explanation to make it much more clear. So that will be really helpful.
Thank you.
I can chime in real quick about those type of variables, especially with UAS variables, not just for the longitudinal file, but most any UAS survey, the data set, if it ends in the letter S and then a number, let's say like whatever it is, S1, S2, S3, let's just say race S1, that S indicates that it's a, choose all that apply type variable. So then you're looking at a variable where the respondents, they're not going to be exclusive, add up to 100 every time because of the type of question, the checkbox kind of question that it is. So I believe the race one that we include in the longitudinal file, I'm not 100% on that, it has that S suffix. So that's kind of a dead giveaway that that's the kind of variable that you're working with.
Maria had another question about where we find the files to merge by UAS ID at the state level.
That is in, give me a second, I'm gonna give you the name. I'll just tell you the path here. Or actually I can maybe share that in a second. Let's see here. There's an external page, basically within the COVID-19 on the UAS website, there is an external page with all of that. And I'm, let's see here. I will add that link to the slide selection.
Yes, and we'll be distributing the slides to everyone who attended.
Yeah,
so we'll definitely, we can add that, or if anyone finds it sooner, you can put it in the chat. Good question. Oh, how often is the longitudinal file updated, Andrew?
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks, with that, which includes the latest 2 waves, correct?
Yep. The latest wave. Every wave we update.
Got it.
And I can you are you looking at my slideshow or are you looking at
We're looking at your slides still. But if you found the link, you can also put it in the chat.
Okay. Okay, I'll do that. I'll just enter the link in the chat.
All right. Did anyone have any other questions? Maybe not at this time. We did go over a lot of material, and if you have been working with the files, some of this may have been pretty obvious to you, but if not, you might have some questions later once we distribute the slides. So do feel free to reach out to our alias, which Andrew will also include in the slides, and we can help you get started and sort of navigate through our website and the data files. But if there is nothing else, Andrew, any final words?
Not really.
Good luck.
I'm so proud of my pun. So go look at that. So I feel.
Great. Well, thank you Thank you everyone for coming to this this webinar. We'll try to have some more in the future on some specific approaches to the data. And we really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.